let somebody in. This is a little distracting when I have to let somebody in. Hope that worked. The talk today is Ruth. Ruth is a biblical heroine, and we're going to talk about kind of the connection between Ruth, Shavuot, the upcoming holiday, and when I was learning about her, and it really struck me how timely this is. And you know, everything, you guys are all constantly learning, and you go to a lot of Rabbi Ari's classes, and what you can see is that ancient texts and ancient teachings have so much relevance in our lives today. And we're going to see that here. So just to begin with, I don't know if you know the main characters, but we will introduce them. But if you know, at the end of the story, Ruth is with Boaz. She marries Boaz. So what was Boaz like before he married Ruth? He was ruthless. Okay. Yankel asks Moshe his secret to success in business. He says, I'm giving one of Rabbi Ari's classes. I have to do all the, dad jokes here. Okay. So Yankel asks Moshe his secret to success in business. 2 words, good decisions. And how do you make good decisions? 1 word, experience. And how do you get experience? 2 words, bad decisions. So it is fair to say that all of us struggle with decisions. And right now, I think that it's fair to say, especially being in Atlanta, there's a lot of decisions we're struggling with right now. We're in a state that's different than the other states in our country, and a lot of opportunity is open up to us. And are we wearing a mask? Are we not wearing a mask? Are we going into stores with masks? Are we running with a mask? There's just, are we letting people into our house? Are we doing social distance dinners? Are we going to go to restaurants? Are we going to there's just so many, these are just the minutia of what's going on, but there's big decisions. People are thinking about their businesses. They're thinking about how to move forward. I think a lot of people are making decisions about their work. It's like, this is maybe not work I found fulfilling up till now. Maybe there's something else I want to be doing, or maybe my boss didn't treat me right in this situation. So maybe I want to find new work. There's just a lot of decisions. So, and how do I keep a slower pace? I like this slower pace that I got over quarantine. So how do I continue this slower pace when I do have to go back to work and I do have to get back into living? And that is the reality of living here, that we are called upon to make these decisions right now. But in general, if you're a human and you're an adult, you are constantly making decisions. And often we make good choices, and often we make not such good choices. And that is just a part of our success in life or our not success. So trying to admit somebody in, sorry. Okay. So wouldn't it be great though, if there was a skill set to make more consistent good choices? Because often we know the right decision, but we find it difficult because it means giving up something we enjoy, right? Sometimes making the right decision is also kind of a selfless act, and that's hard for us. So how can we be better positioned to making right choices even when there's sacrifice involved? So what kind of mindset does it take to be that person that making a decision is difficult, but kind of having this shift and thinking about sacrifice and thinking about those things that make difficult decisions easier? This is really annoying. Okay. So we're going to try to get some skills here to position us to make better decisions, especially when there's sacrifice involved. So we're going to explore the story of Ruth. She was a Jewish heroine, and she made some incredibly brave choices. Her decisions were really interesting, and we're going to see what we can learn from her. And as we go through the whole story, we're going to see that there's different characters, and they make different choices that quite literally change the course of their lives. So we'll be analyzing the story in depth. walking away with some powerful tools to help us make better and healthier decisions in our lives, and to think about when to make the sacrifice that's right for us, okay? Before we begin, as I'm telling the story, I want you to pay close attention to the decisions being made by the various characters in the story, and see if you notice when they are making a decision and when they could really have chosen something else. And ask yourself, who is making what decision and why? Because I think if we get into the heads of the main characters, it will help us figure out who made what decision and how they came to that and what we can learn from that. Because again, we're here to take an ancient story, an ancient text, an ancient learning, and apply it literally, as my teens say, RN, right now. Okay, my mouse, which I probably will need, needs to be connected to a battery. Did I say that I hate technology? Okay, 1 second. Resets, 1 second. Oh, yo, my battery on my mouse. Okay, I'm back. All right, so the story of Ruth. Yeah, my battery is dead and I need access to this, I need access to that. I'm not sure what to do. It's gonna take a minute to charge. Okay, so we're gonna tell the story of Ruth, and actually have the pages here, which is great. Okay, so the story of Ruth. I said that 4 times, but the story takes place in the era of the Judges, around either 1150 or 950 BCE, and that's nothing to do with Corona. The C is the common era, but I know we're calling it BC before Corona, AC after Corona now. A little over 3,000 years ago. It was a very tumultuous time period with huge ups and downs and huge swings, and just a lot of things were going on for this tiny young Jewish nation. It's not that many years, less than 1,000 years after they have received the Torah. And at the beginning of the book, we are, Ari, if you could admit those people, I cannot right now because my mouse is charging. Maybe I could, I can't. Okay, so we're introduced to a man named Elimelech, and he was a prominent man. He was quite wealthy. And here's what happens, okay? We're told that there's a famine in the land of Israel, and Elimelech and his wife, Naomi, and his children, they cross the Jordan and they leave to the land of Moab. Ari, are you able to admit these people? I don't know if you're on. Okay, so they leave town, and the 2 sons retrace the footsteps of the ancient Jewish people from Israel. Now the question is, let's see if I can use this mouse again. Okay. The question is, why does he leave? Why does Elimelech leave? And what we come to know is that Elimelech leaves because he doesn't want to deal with all the handouts he's going to have to give. He knows that there's a famine, he's wealthy, people are going to ask him for things, and he's really not willing to do that. So he picks up and he leaves. Now, he has these 2 sons, and Elimelech dies, and his 2 sons, Machlon and Kilion, they marry Moabite princesses, Ruth and Orpah, and they were either the daughters or the granddaughters of King Eglon of Moab. So these were really prestigious girls. They came from wealthy families, and they married these wealthy Jewish men. There is a dispute amongst the commentaries whether they converted after they married or before they married, or before their husbands died or after their husbands died. It's a dispute, but we know that Ruth for sure converted. And eventually Machlon and Kilion, these 2 sons, so their father dies, and then they lose all their money. They die penniless. So this is a huge turn of events. We have Elimelech. He doesn't want to stay in the land. He doesn't want to give handouts to the poor people. He's just going to leave the situation. He's going to leave everyone behind, and he's going to travel. So this is a family that was once prestigious. It once had wealth. That was everything about them. And all of a sudden, we have 3 widows who are penniless. This happens really quickly. Naomi, who is bereaved, she is the widow, decides to return home to Israel. Now, you might ask the question, are there any children involved? So far, there are no children involved, okay? So Naomi tells her 2 daughters-in-law, I'm penniless, I'm in a strange country, I'm going home. And they tell her that they want to join. She says, my daughters, I must go away. I have decided to return to my hometown, to Beit Lechem. Things cannot be good there, and there's no reason why you should suffer too. Take my advice, therefore, and go back to your parents' home. Go back to your riches. Go back to your palace. Go back to your castle. Your husbands are dead, and maybe you'll find new husbands. But I've lost my husband. I've lost my sons forever. You guys are young. Go and find yourselves new husbands. Arpa is sad, but she looks at her mother-in-law and she bids goodbye. Like, she realizes, what am I going to follow? My poor mother-in-law. I can go back to my good life. But Ruth clings to her mother-in-law, to Naomi, and begs her to allow her to go with her. And she says, but you're young. You can get other husbands. Why are you insisting on coming? But Ruth wants to go. And she says these touching words. She says, and this is what she says. She says, entreat me not to leave thee and to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and whither thou lost, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and where thou will be buried, the Lord do so to me, and more so, if aught but death part thee and me. So this is the beautiful words, where you go, I will go, your Lord is my Lord. And this is what Ruth tells Naomi, that it's not even an option for her. She is going to stay. So the 2 of them continue their travels, and Ruth, a huge sacrifice on her part, decides to continue along. She leaves everything behind, unlike her sister-in-law, her family, her comfort, because she is committed to this faith. She's committed to her dead husband, and she's going to go. Now, I just want to put in here that we have these Moabite princesses who are now leaving Moab and coming into the land of Israel. There is a Jewish law, that you may not marry anyone from Moab, because the Moabites were so cruel. They didn't greet the Jews with food and water when we were leaving Egypt. And therefore, you cannot marry anyone from Moab. Now, you are allowed to marry a Moabite woman, because women were never expected to come out and greet. So who knows if they would have come out and greet. So it is about Moabite men. But you can imagine that the entire nation is sullied with this reputation. Nobody really wants to go anywhere near the Moabites. Machlon and Kilion married them away from their family, but now they're coming back to, the ghetto, so to speak, or the community. And here she's coming with this Moabite daughter. So just think about that in terms of the prejudice and the bias that was going on towards this woman, and they're penniless. So this is kind of what it looks like as they're coming back. It's not a pretty sight, and she's bringing back somebody who is not really going to be accepted in this community that they're going back to. Okay, so and furthermore, to exacerbate this issue, is people didn't even know this law. It wasn't so common, the knowledge about this. So it was just like, Moab, keep away. I don't want to have anything to do with Moab. That they knew. So that now another detail. So there's the detail about the Moabites. And then there's another detail, is that Jewish law teaches that if a couple does not have children and the husband passes away, it's a mitzvah for the husband's brother to marry this widow. Now you can imagine. Okay, I'm gonna mute people. Mute all. There is a, am I muted? No. Okay, so there's this mitzvah that if a woman loses her husband, her brother-in-law should marry her. Now you can imagine this is a very compassionate mitzvah, because think about ancient times that families wanted, you needed to keep land in families, you needed to keep your little empire together, or your little plot of land, whatever it was. So you wanted to keep things in the family. And if you didn't have a child, you would honor your brother by marrying his widow. And this is called, it's the mitzvah of Yibum. It's called Levirate marriage. I don't know if Yibum or Levirate marriage, which one is English, which one is Talmudic, and they all mean the same thing, right? So it means that you marry the deceased, the brother marries his deceased brother's widow. But if the marriage is not possible or not desired, a ceremony called chalitza is performed. And basically the widow, and this actually happens today, if a woman is married to a man and her husband dies and there's a single brother, they do perform chalitza even today. So it's more ceremonial. They don't do yibum. I have seen where yibum has happened. It's actually quite a beautiful thing. If somebody gets married to somebody, and then an uncle starts taking care of his nieces and nephews and becomes the father. I have seen this happen. But so the ceremony called chalitza, the widow takes off a shoe from her brother-in-law's foot, and she's released with this to marry whomever she wants. Okay, so even though yibum applies to the brother, in ancient times, it was also performed by a broader circle of family relatives. Okay, so now think about Moabite princess. She also has this idea of being able to marry her deceased brothers and have children for him, but both the brothers are dead. So that's maybe somewhere in the back of Naomi's head. Ruth is a new convert. Maybe she doesn't know about this. Okay, it's going to be very relevant to Ruth. Okay, so back to our story. Ruth returns with Naomi to Israel, back to her home in Bethlehem. Their return causes quite a stir, but nobody's offering any help because remember, they're impoverished. We live in a time where things are very class-based. You're Moabite, you're not wealthy, you left us. Maybe people are rightfully annoyed, you left us. Oh, now you're coming back and looking for a handout yourself. So, but Naomi still owns property in Bethlehem, but it hasn't been taken care of. She doesn't have any liquid assets. So it's harvest time, and Ruth and Naomi are there, and they're both very worn out for their journey. So Ruth tells Naomi, her mother-in-law, you rest, and I'm going to go out in the fields and see what I can sustain us with. So Ruth enters a field where many men are busy cutting barley and they're binding it into sheaves. I mean, this is what happens, right? And there's barley spilling out of their wagons. I guess the famine's over, they have food and they're carting them away. A little hesitantly, Ruth, she's spurred on by this desperation. Remember, she's a princess. So she starts looking to see if she can pick up some sheaves of barley for her mother-in-law. And suddenly she hears a voice, and this voice says to her kindly and gently, God be with you, stranger. Come along into the field. Don't be bashful. Gather some ears of corn and satisfy your hunger. And this is Boaz. She happened to be in this field. That's where she chanced upon the field of Boaz. And we're going to see that Boaz is the owner of the field, and he takes a liking. Immediately, he notices something special about this Ruth. So Ruth thanks him. She plucks some ears of grain, and she's going to depart when he says to her again, why don't you gather payah? And she says, what's payah? And then he tells her, payah is the corners of the fields. They had to leave. And what I want to tell you here now is that the Torah is so, there's so much compassion in the capitalistic society. It still leaves room for the poor built into the laws of the Torah. So he tells her, take payah. The payah are the corners of the field. So our Torah tells us that when an owner of the field has his grain cut, he doesn't cut the corners of the field. What other word do you know from payah? Payas. That's the corner of the man's face, and those are the hairs that he leaves. Okay. So wonderful, says Ruth, and she stayed and she cuts the corners of the field. She gets corn and she puts them in her basket and she's about to go. And Boaz says, no, you don't need to leave yet. Why don't you benefit from the leket? What does leket mean? Asked Ruth. Leket are the gleanings. According to our law, if a reaper misses some grains from his scythe or drops some, he's not allowed to go back and pick up that grain. It's left for the poor. So now Naomi picks up some leket. And, Ruth is looking at her. He's liking her more and more. And she's taking advantage of these laws that were there for her. She's a widow, right? And then she has a whole basket full and she's ready to go. And then he says, wait, there's one more. Take advantage of shikha, the forgotten sheaves. The Torah is indeed limitless in its care for the less fortunate, says Ruth. Wow, tell me, what is shikha? So Boaz says to her, when the owner of a field is taking his load of grain to his granaries, it is possible that he may have forgotten some sheaves in the field. He cannot go back for those sheaves, and those sheaves are left for the widow and the orphan and the stranger. So Ruth was very happy with her good fortune. She gathered almost more than she could carry, and she and Naomi are well provided for a little bit. She thanks Boaz, who makes her promise, come back again. In the meantime, Boaz is inquiring about who this young woman is. It says that she was very modest. She wasn't pushy. She wasn't picky. People were all over the place, and she stood modestly. And, I think that when you know somebody who's a good character, you can usually notice that. And that's exactly what Boaz noticed. He noticed this was a woman of high character. So he even told his workers, forget some bundles for her. So Ruth comes back to where Naomi is, and she tells her what happened. And Naomi is very excited because she tells Ruth that Boaz is in fact a relative, and even a close relative, someone who could be her redeemer in a Levirate marriage and take care of her and perpetuate Machlon's name. So Ruth is very excited, and she heads back to Boaz's field the next day, and the next day, and the whole season. But Boaz says nothing to her about marriage. Now, the end of the harvest season is looming, and Naomi decides to make a move. She tells Ruth to go to Boaz at night when he wouldn't be distracted. Now, remember, he's a wealthy landowner. He's got lots going on. He's running. Think of a factory. He's running. He's coming. He's going. Go to him at night and ask him to marry you. How progressive. You go and ask him to marry you. So Ruth agrees, and here's how it plays out. Ruth approaches Boaz, and she asks him to marry her. She says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are my family redeemer. And Boaz loves the idea, but there's one problem, he says. He says there's a closer relative who actually has the right of first refusal. And this is a man that in the text is called Ploni Almoni. And till today, when you want to say John Doe in Jewish, in Hebrew, in Yiddish, you say Ploni Almoni, like so-and-so, John Doe. So it's very interesting. Why is he called Ploni Almoni here? And we'll see that in a minute. Basically because he doesn't deserve a name, because he doesn't do what he's meant to do. Okay, so in the morning, Boaz approaches Ploni, and he's very smart about it, Boaz. He gathers 10 men so that in case Ploni says it didn't go down that way and that's not how it happened, Boaz wants to make sure that if he is offering this woman that he would love to marry and do a mitzvah, that it's happening. And if he gets refused, it's happening in public, so nobody can say, oh, you married her, I was supposed to marry her. Get it? He's smart. So he gathers 10 men, and he tells Ploni that, first of all, do you know that it's permitted to marry a Moabite convert? Because not everyone knew that. Then he tells Ploni that Naomi is planning on selling her ancestral property due to her poverty, and that it's a mitzvah for the closest relative to redeem the property. So Ploni's excited. He's going to get more property in his family. And then Boaz says, but wait, the condition to buying the property is marrying Ruth, the Moabite. And Ploni says, no, thank you. Okay, so this is really, really a part of the life there. He could not see himself giving in to marrying somebody who was less than or looked askance upon. It's not worth it for him. So he says, lest I imperil my own heritage. So he's thinking about his future, and he thinks this will put just not a good image for himself. He doesn't want to look bad, even if it's technically permitted. And that's all Boaz needed to hear. Boaz has permission. He marries Ruth, and not only does the Moabite princess live happily ever after, like a real fairy tale, but they have a child. And their child is Oved. And Oved becomes the grandfather of none other than King David. And King David is the father, the great-great-grandfather of who will be the Mashiach. So Ruth is pretty significant. Her union with Boaz is quite important in our history. So now we know this wonderful, tragic, interesting love story that takes place. We know that what comes out of it. So before the story, we spoke about decision-making, right? And who is making these decisions and why? So let's discuss this. If anybody has a question, you are welcome to put it in the question box. There's like comments, I think, a comment box. Oh, I see this. Okay. Aha, fine. I see a lot of comments. Okay. All right. So who are the major characters who make these big decisions and what are their decisions? So first of all, we have Elimelech. Easy one. What is his decision? He leaves. His decision seems to be selfish. He doesn't want people lining up at his door. He abandons his people. He abandons his community. He doesn't want the burden. He is not interested in sacrificing for others. Then we have Orpah. Very clear-cut Elimelech. And, you know, it doesn't end well for him. Not saying that your decisions don't end well for you, but with him it didn't. Okay. Then we have Orpah. The next big, this is why it's a biblical story, because it's clear cut. Not always, it's not usually clear cut. Okay, Orpah. She is of Moabite royalty. She marries into a Jewish family, a prestigious Jewish family. Her husband dies young. She initially, I'll follow Naomi, but then she doesn't. So what drives her decision? Probably similar to Elimelech. Orpah seems driven by what's comfortable for her. She wants to be taken care of. I don't blame her. She leaves her Judaism behind, she leaves sacrifice behind, and she goes on her merry way. We never hear of her again. She doesn't make any ripples in our life, your life, nobody's life. Then we have Ruth. Unlike Orpah, she sticks with Naomi despite all logic and despite all comfort. She gives up her comfort, she gives up her security, she gives up everything. What do you think drives her decision? Her decision seems to be driven by commitment to her mother-in-law, her faith, and to her Judaism. It's really an incredible sacrifice. Then we have Plony Almoni, John Doe, so and so. He declines to marry Ruth. What do you think drives his decision? He takes the easy way out. He doesn't want to do anything that will make himself look bad or be stigmatized. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He wants to keep things status quo. Don't mess with me. I'm really good. I don't want to do anything that's beyond my comfort zone. Even though he has a chance to save a family and a woman, a widow, and build Machlon's name, he's not interested. He chooses the path of least resistance and fades from the history books, just like Orpah. We don't even know his name. That's how much he fades. There's no sacrifice there. And then we have Boaz. He makes the choice to marry Ruth and build a family with her. So what drives his decision? You can say love and attraction, and that's great. It's true. But it's also a courageous choice that he made. He chose to marry Ruth despite the stigma, despite what everybody would say. He sacrificed to a large extent his own comfort of living with his people exactly the way he was supposed to. Now, we have bias and we have stigma today in 2020, and we're all so woke and we're all so progressive and we're all so aware of what that does to people. And we still have that in our lives. So you can imagine what this was like 3,000 years ago. He gives that all up and he does what's right. He sacrificed of himself. So in the end, yes, he gets the girl and he gets the child of David, but he did sacrifice. So we're going to talk about the comfort versus sacrifice. What is common to both Elimelech, Orpah, and Plony is they choose comfort. What is common to Ruth and Boaz is they choose sacrifice. Now, for a minute, I just want to talk about when people choose comfort, and sometimes in little tiny minute decisions we choose comfort and we know we're thinking small in the moment, and that's okay. But generally, when people choose sacrifice, it's because they're big thinkers. They have a much broader view of the world. They have big, broad shoulders, and they can carry heavy things on their shoulders. So the first thing I want to tell you is if you want to be a big thinker, make sacrifices, or if you make sacrifices, you will be a big thinker. It is the big thinking mindset. Okay, so who is remembered more favorably? It's pretty clear that Elimelech or Ploni each choose the path of least resistance, and they don't have resistance. The choice was most comfortable for them, and they go and fold in their little life, and we don't really know about them again, only to talk about them right now. So they have some merit in that. Ruth and Boaz, they conversely made the choice that was more difficult, but more in line with their higher set of values. They sacrificed of themselves. Remember, they thought big. They thought about values. They thought about things that are beyond their own little minutia, their own little world, their own, I need my cup of wine in my bed and that's all I care about. Sometimes that's fine, but this was, okay. So in other words, Elimelech or Ploni took the easy way out and made more self-serving choices, while Ruth and Boaz sacrificed to make altruistic choices. Now, this is an important distinction because we're faced with this all the time. Will we choose what feels good for us, or will we sacrifice to do what is right? And this is often very difficult, and it's important to have the tools so that we could decide wisely. When is it the time to, I'm just gonna do what I wanna do right now, it feels good, I'm sorry. Or am I going to sacrifice to do what's right? So now we can draw some tools and insights from the story of Ruth that we can apply to the decisions we face in our own lives. Because it's one thing to know what a person did, but it's quite another to know why and how they did it, so that we can replicate it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So now, to understand the true depth of the story and its personal application, we need to look at a very interesting detail. It's kind of like the big purple elephant regarding the book of Ruth. And that is, what does it have to do with Shavuos? Well, we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos. Why? Okay, what is Ruth and Shavuos giving of the Torah connected to each other? So there's an ancient, so we read the book of, the ancient Jewish custom is to read the book of Ruth. So some people read it to themselves, some people read it out loud. What is the connection? Some say it's because on Shavuot, we accept the Torah anew. That's what you're supposed to do. And if you didn't get 10 commandments, if you don't have them, please email me or Rabbi Ari. We're trying to do this 10-10-10 challenge. 10 minutes, 10 commandments at 10 a.m. So everybody on Friday, we want everybody to be doing that in their homes at the same time. So we received the Torah anew, all the energy like that was there at Sinai, everything, this world is a cycle, right? So I'm going to admit somebody now. So if Shavuos is this side of the cycle, every year when we come back to Shavuos, we get the same energy that we did the first year that the Torah was given. That's how the holidays work. We pull down the energy because we're back at that part of the year in that cycle. So Ruth, when she chose to go with Naomi, it was like us getting the Torah again. Some say Ruth reminds us of how much we need to be willing to give up for the Torah, right? Ruth gave up so much for Torah, and that's sometimes what we're called upon to do. Some say it's because King David was born and died on Shavuos, and King David, we now know, is the great-grandchild of Ruth. Some say it's related to the harvest, the season, which is one of the names of Shavuos. All of these are great answers, but there's actually something even deeper. And we will make the connection when we understand what Shavuos is all about, okay? So when you look a little closer, you realize that the whole Shavuos, so men and women study the book of Ruth on Shavuos. It's read out loud, like with at the Bima in some shuls, and some people read it privately. It's both. The lessons are for men and women. Absolutely. Okay. So when you look a little closer, the whole Shavuos giving the Torah things makes no sense, because the whole Mount Sinai makes no sense, because if you read the text, you see that the Jews were keeping Torah long before they ever got the Torah. The Talmud says Torah study is from the time of the patriarchs. That means that there was a yeshiva. Remember, if you remember the story of Rivka, she had 2 babies in her stomach, and every time they passed the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver, her tzaddik baby would kick and want to get out, right? So this Torah study is going way, way back. God tells Isaac that he loves Abraham because he keeps my mitzvot. Abraham passed this legacy to Isaac, to Jacob, Jacob to Joseph and his sons. Bottom line is that the Torah was studied and mitzvot were observed long before the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So if the Torah wasn't really given on that day, what happened? What is this great big holiday of receiving the Torah, where this revelation, and why do we celebrate it each year? So it's true, the Torah was studied, but something huge happened at Sinai. What happened? Up until then, Torah and mitzvot were non-obligatory, they were non-binding, they were optional. When God gathered us around Har Sinai, he obligated us to keep the Torah and the mitzvos. No longer is this something that you can do, it became something you must do as a Jew. Now, a little secret here. Every single one of us was at Har Sinai. Every single one of our souls, every single soul of every convert was at Har Sinai, and every single one of us committed to this. Okay, that's why you feel this connection to the Torah, because we're all there. We all committed ourselves to this. Okay, so back to the question: what is the cause for celebration? Mazel tov! You now have a whole list of obligations. Are you serious? Like, what are we celebrating? If all of a sudden, so you took us from, you can do the Torah, it's very nice, pat on your back, you get a prize, to now you have to? What is this? So what the Talmud, there's a quote in the Talmud, and this is going to give us some of our answer here, and I'm sure many of you know where we're going with this. The Talmud says, greater to be obligated than not obligated. Not obligated. Doing something you're not obligated to do sounds very dedicated. You didn't have to clean up your room. You cleaned it up anyway. You're a tzaddik. I love you. Mwah. But in truth, being obligated is much more valuable. You see, when you're obligated, it means it's very important that you do this thing. It's the difference between my children when I ask them, do you want something? And they say, sure. Or yes, please. Sure is like, I don't know, give it to me, don't give it to me. I don't care, right? So it is the difference. This thing needs to happen, and you need to make it happen. So when you think about just now in our lives today, flattening the curve, if it would have been important, if it would have been a suggestion, would it have been important? If it was important, would it have been a suggestion? It's life-changing. It's life-giving. You need to get this done. You know why I need to stay home in quarantine? Because I matter and it's important. It wasn't a suggestion, because had it been a suggestion, come on, who would have stayed home? Nobody. Only people who were fearful would have stayed home. Young kids, the teens would have been rocking the streets. But you were obligated because it's important. You matter in keeping everyone here healthy. When you're not obligated to do something, it means either the thing is not important or you're not important, or both. That's what happens when you're not obligated. Think, what's the difference between hearing that you're needed for something versus hearing you're not needed for something? Which makes you feel more empowered? And I know that everybody with a thinking head, who thinks big, who doesn't just think about like this, felt very empowered by being in quarantine. I'm not talking about loss of jobs and all of that, all that was going on. But I think all of us feel very empowered that my being home, the memes that were going around, me sitting on a couch is like getting up to fight in World War II. Like, I'm doing something important by staying home right now. It is infinitely more empowering to be told this is important and I need you to do this. Think about your boss. Think about a job. And he tells you, sure, you can work on this presentation if you'd like. You don't have to. How does that make you feel? Or if your boss comes in and says, I need you to work on this presentation. You are the one I need. You are the talent for this presentation. You are the brains behind it. That is empowering. So this is what happened at Sinai. God communicated to us that he has some very important things that he needs us as Jews to get done, things that are important to him and important to the world. And he needs us to do them. So no longer is it like, sure, you want to get it done? Yeah, whatever, someone else can do it. It's you need to get it done. You're important for this. This is the absolute most empowering thing a person could ever hear. And this is what happened at Har Sinai. And this is what we say before every mitzvah, in case you ever forget this. Think about it. When you say a mitzvah, you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kidshanu. He made us holy with his commandments. The commandments give us meaning and value. They are a privilege. So far from being a burden, oh, somebody wants to be a burden. So far from being a burden or an annoyance, the obligation of Torah and mitzvot is the greatest gift, the gift of meaning, the gift of significance, and the gift of empowerment. On Shavuos, we recognize that our obligation is itself our greatest privilege, and that's why we celebrate, okay? So it's the obligation. It's the fact that I am needed to light Shabbos candles. I am needed to wrap those tefillin. Now, it's not always I'm needed for everything. Women are needed on one hand, men are needed, we bring different energies to it. That's a whole other discussion, but our children are needed for certain things. Adults are needed, it's what are you needed for? And that is what is going on here. Okay, so now when you have this perspective, it really changes everything. Because when you look at something as a burden, the sacrifice, the work for it becomes difficult. It's even unbearable. And I would say that during the 1900s, the 1800s, post-World War II, Yiddishkeit did often feel like a burden. You know why? Because the people who were teaching it made it burdensome. You must do this, and it was not based on joy and a privilege. It was based on like what will happen if you don't do it, focusing a lot on the negative versus focusing on the privilege of doing it. It was the lens was very burdensome. Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in 1 second. Okay, so, but when you look at it as a privilege, sacrifice is not sacrifice, it's joy. Think about so many people get married and have kids, not because we're looking for more responsibilities and obligations, but because of the incredible joy and privilege it is to matter in somebody else's life, right? Marriage is the perfect example. It is a privilege to be there for that person. It is not a burden. Sometimes it feels burdensome, but we're human, so we vacillate between those things. So if you remind yourself how much you matter to someone else, you're more likely to be ready to give of yourself with joy and not act out of selfishness. Okay, so now returning to our story. Amy, you're gonna get the answer. Ruth and Boaz made decisions that reflected their understanding of the critical nature of their choice, the privilege they felt in accepting this responsibility. In other words, they recognized how incredibly significant it was to do what they needed to do, and that trumped all personal considerations. They understood that I'm needed for this. Do you know what kind of energy that gives you? Elimelech, Orpah, and Ploni, they didn't see beyond their little myopic view of like, what would they be needed for? What you need my money? Go next door. You don't need me. They didn't realize how important they were. They didn't realize that they could make a difference. They didn't see themselves as that important. Again, small thinking, not big thinking. So this is why we read and we study the book of Ruth on Shavuos. It reminds us of the power of viewing Torah and mitzvos as an important privilege and responsibility, not, God forbid, a meaningless burden. This is what we're learning exactly from them and their choices. And when we have this perspective, the difficult decisions in life get a little easier. So again, Ruth she didn't feel obligated to follow Naomi. She felt privileged. She felt needed, necessary. I'm going to be there for my mother-in-law. That's what she was. Okay. So I think this is really a good tool. It could be a game changer even when you're making a decision, you say, am I thinking small? Am I thinking just about myself? Or am I thinking big? Am I thinking about the bigger picture here? So when we view our responsibilities as privileges, everything changes. We do them quicker, easier, and profound joy. This is true for our marriages, our kids, parents, spiritual life, and of course, Torah and mitzvahs. So there's a quote I actually saw today, and I thought it was really apropos. It says, it's from Peter Marshall, from, I don't know, the 50s. May we think of freedom not as the right to do as we please, but as the opportunity to do what is right. And this knowledge itself becomes a calling. Knowing that responsibility breeds privilege says to me, let's share this with others. So for example, parents, give your children responsibilities and tell them it's because I value you and that's why I need you to do this. Actually, the converse is true. When you don't let your kids do anything, you're showing them that you don't value them because you don't think they're good enough. And this is especially true as if you change things that your kids already did, like you remake their beds or you reset the table because they didn't do it enough. You're showing them it's not really valuable. But when you give your children responsibilities, you're telling them they matter. They matter to this house. And you know what another little secret about this is? That's really how children get self-esteem, when they matter. That's the real self-esteem. It's not by telling them they're beautiful or that they won all these trophies or telling them that they're amazing at sports or you're so smart or buying them the coolest shoes and the coolest outfits so that they could become so popular. It is by giving children responsibility and value. That is how, side benefit, you gain real self-esteem. Your children will thrive because it is what gives them their value. The same thing is with mothers giving responsibilities or handing over the reins to fathers. Often it is a mistake people make with newborns and they're like, no, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do it right. You're not showing that you value. And if you don't value it, the person, then they don't feel it's a privilege and they feel it's a burden instead of being valued responsibility. So it's all connected to each other. It's value breeds responsibility, privilege. And if you don't value someone, it breeds burden. So when you look at what's going on today, the whole world took upon itself a responsibility, right? Because we were all valued. We were all called upon to do this. And I think all of us hopefully feel that it was our greatest privilege to save lives during this time. Because we sat home and we literally saved people's lives by being home because we were valued. We were called upon to do this. It was our privilege. It was our responsibility. And it might feel burdensome after 72 days, and it might have felt burdensome in certain ways. But if every time you felt a burden, you just change your mindset and say, no, I'm being valued here. I'm needed here. This is, hey, is that, sorry, chatting in there. Okay. So, now I just want to, just for a minute, touch upon this concept of burden, go to the opposite, right? So if you think about your life before Corona, hi Donna, I didn't notice you. So if you think about your life before Corona, when it was free, right? We were free to go to the movies and free to go to Broadway and free to eat out every night and free to go to bars and free to go to plays and free to be with our friends and free to do whatever we wanted. And then boom, all our freedoms were taken away and we were quarantined at home. But then all of a sudden, stripped of all those freedoms, all those distractions, all those things that maybe didn't allow us to look inward, were we then really so free? Were we really feeling free? Because I'm speaking to a lot of people and they say, without these distractions in my life, I can choose, I can think, I can have dinner with my family, I can have conversations, I'm not running, I have nowhere to go. So I'm free to be me. I'm not, you think about the teenagers and all of the FOMO, everything they were missing out on was all that freedom to party and to have fun and all this, the free life they had. But now they're home, all of those freedoms are taken away, but they're not competing and they're not worrying. And so when are they really more free? Were they more free when they had so many distractions in their life and so much, sorry, I'm gonna let someone in again. Were they really free? Yes, they had all these freedoms to do everything, but a lot of those distractions really, they're just that, they're distractions, and we can't really be ourselves. So quarantine did make us less free. We have nowhere to go. We are just stripped of our distractions, but we're free to be alive. With these restrictions, we gave everyone else their freedom. And perhaps even in a certain sense, we gave ourselves a certain freedom. Because I think of the teenagers, the kids. I mean, one of my kids actually said to me, she's like, I'm so happy I'm not in school now. No kids are mean to me anymore. So, she's stuck at home, but she's blossoming. Someone said to me, I hope your children are blossoming where they're planted. And we are planted, baby, right here. So moving on to this next phase, we have a lot of lessons here, but moving on to the next phase, hopefully it's the post-corona phase and we can really get out of this. Think about, is this a real restriction on my life or a privilege or an opportunity to help someone else with the limitations imposed? So whether it be something simple like wearing a mask, washing your hands, lining up with space, right? They're all restrictive, but they're all opportunities to be helpful and save somebody else. And this is also a new way to look at your own life right now. Not as like some far out hypothetical metaphor, but I invite you to look at your Jewish life in the same way. Is you're dating someone only Jewish, educating your children Jewishly, taking upon yourself mitzvah observance? Is it just more restrictions I'm putting on my life? Or is it the privilege that I am taking upon? I'm privileged, I'm being called up to do this, and I'm doing it with joy because it is my responsibility to be a light unto the other nations, because that's what we are as Jews. We have this responsibility to be lamplighters, to give off love to the world, to give off a sense of comfort and calm and teach people about this. But we connect to that through studying Torah, through doing mitzvahs. And if we're going to be lamplighters, we've got to light our lamps, right? So how do we light our lamps? By connecting ourselves to Torah, to mitzvahs. And I think about that. Am I doing these things? So being home on Shabbat or having Friday night dinner might feel restrictive. I'm not at the movies, but maybe that is my light. I'm connecting to my neshama. I'm connecting to my soul. So that's like wearing my mask to protect myself, to protect everyone else. So I want you to think about this. Think about the things that we do to restrict ourselves, but help ourselves and help others. So is it just a burden, or are you called up every single day as a Jew with these opportunities? So at the end of the day, I hope you will view your Judaism more as opportunities and a privilege, and therefore connect more to God, because at the end of the day, we're humans, we're built to connect with each other and connect to God. And that is my message about Shavuot. So if anybody has any comments or questions, I wanted to just, I don't know if my friend was on here. I wanted to just to reiterate one more time the point of the self-esteem, which is that by giving children jobs, responsibilities, telling them that they are able and capable, you are it's not a burden for your child. They get self-esteem through that. That is how they build themselves up, by doing things for the family unit, doing things for other people, because you're showing them they matter. When you are helicoptering parents, when you do things for children that they can do themselves, they just go like this, you know? There's nothing for them to do. So I think that's such an important message that I learned as a parent. And so I hope I gave you some tools moving forward, making decisions, thinking about them, and not being this, but being this, because we all really want to be open to the world and so much more blessing. Listen, if you're this, right, more can shine on you. But if you're this, then you only have this little receptacle. So it's good all over. Happy Shavuos, and don't forget to say the 10 commandments, read them, study them, and enjoy your holiday together, because it's a really special time.
Thank you, Dena.
Thank you, Dena.
Thank you so much.